Our next step is going to be moving some of our markup from our hard-coded file into the set of files that are used to put the WordPress pages together. So to get started here, you're going to need to open several different files from the WordPress theme that you're working in, and you're going to want to have your hardcode files open as well. So I've already got all these things open in my code editor. I've opened for my hardcoded page my index.html and my various style sheets. From your theme, you're going to want to open first in the parts folder, shared, all three of those files, footer, header, and sidebar. So you open those. You already will hopefully have styles.css open. If not, go ahead and open that file. Also open single, page, and index.php. And those are the files we'll work with pretty much throughout the rest of the process. We may bring in a few more, but those will be the core ones. So I've got those files open in my code editor. Now it's a lot of tabs, but it'll allow me to switch back and forth to all the different files that I need. I also have in a separate window my hard code from my one page that I created there. My HTML, CSS, all that jazz. So our goal now is to take this styling like we see here on the hard-coded page and move our markup and stuff into the WordPress theme parts so the styling carries over, because right now we've got our CSS and stuff in here, but we don't have any of the classes or ID names or markup arrangement like we did in our hard-coded file, so the styles aren't really carrying over. You probably, having worked with WordPress before, if you have, know some of this stuff, but really one of the big or cool things, big advantages of WordPress is how it is modularized or broken up into different pieces and parts. So, for example, since the header is something that's used over and over and over again on different pages, it has its own file, and that header.php file is used to generate the header of the page on any and all of the pages that need it. So any code in this particular file is going to be put onto all of our pages where the header would go. Same thing with the footer PHP file and sidebar PHP file. They're designated parts to the template. What's loading our blog page in the browser right now is the file index.php. So whenever we go to this home blog page, that's what's actually generating this output. If we look at that file, the index.php in our editor, we can see a few different things. Here to start off with, we have a line that says get template parts, part shared header. This is the line of code that actually goes and gets whatever's in that header PHP file and dumps it into the HTML output. So whenever we load the page, this line of code dumps out header.php, so whatever's in that file shows up here at the top of the page like it should. Same thing with get template parts, sidebar, and footer. These bits of code will get whatever's in the sidebar PHP file and footer PHP file. This section of code in the middle is what we call the content loop. That is what we're going to have generating the actual content on the page. So whatever is in the content area or container is going to be generated by this section of code. And right now, essentially what it's doing for the index page is going through the database of posts, and as long as there are posts there, it's going to generate the posts and put it onto the page. So if we look at the output of that, or what we get when we load our page in the browser, we can see we get stuff that's in the header, so that includes like the blog title, and then Our sidebar doesn't really have anything in it, so it's not showing up. And then we have here where all the posts are coming out. This is being generated by that content loop. So it just generates one post after another until there's no more posts left to generate. And then we'll get our footer at the bottom of the page. Now I may already have some stuff in the footer. I'm going to go ahead and take that back out for purposes of showing you what we're doing here. So yeah, I'm going to take this stuff out. Alright. So first let's work with our header PHP file. Now the best way to start approaching this problem of how do we break apart what we've got here and move it into these various pieces and parts is to think about and look for your large containers in different areas of the page. So for me, I've got a header up here, a content area here that holds all my posts, a sidebar here that's holding some recent posts and also some social media icons, and a simple footer down there. So I've really got 4 big areas on that page. Now, the difference between every person, everyone's case would be kind of unique. So depending on how your layout is set up, it probably be different for you. But all the same, similar approach. If I then look at my code for my hard-coded page that I made, my HTML, I can see, I'll put some spaces in between so I can see my different sections. I've got kind of the header content area of my page up here at the top. I've got a section with the ID of content here that's holding all of my posts. So that's kind of my content area, my post area. Here's my section with the ID of sidebar, so that's my sidebar. This is actually what has their social media icons in it. My footer at the bottom of the page, down there. So I want to use this HTML that I've got and kind of break it into pieces and put it into the different appropriate files. So first, my header.php. Now again, whatever's in this header.php is going to dump out on any page that has a header. This actually also includes any stuff up here in the head content of the page, be that, metadata or the title. Right now the title is pulling the blog name from the database, so that's good. You will need metadata in here. That's one of your requirements, so make sure you don't skip over that. If you have any other stuff in your hard-coded file in between the head tags, we'll be sure to bring that over as well. But what we're going to do is come back to our hard-coded stuff. And if you have anything up here in between the head tags that needs to come over, we'll go ahead and get that now. Whoops. But what I'm really interested in is this right here. So I've got my header with a class of primary, and that class is what I've been using to apply that styling on my hard-coded page. And I'll also want to get that wrapper div as I'm doing this to bring over the styles associated with the wrapper that I used on my hard-coded page. Now I'll close that wrapper actually in footer.php, not in header.php, because just like on our regular page, we don't close the wrapper right underneath this header tag here. We wait until we get to the bottom of the file. But I'm going to copy and paste this structure and replace what's in this header PHP file with my stuff. Bringing over these class names and ID names is going to apply the styling that I've got in my style sheet to the page. We'll come back and deal with this navigation in a later video. Making that dynamic is another one of the requirements that we've got. So we'll just copy and paste this for now and go ahead and see how we're looking. So there's my hard-coded page. Here's what I have right now. Let me hit refresh. You can see we're already moving a little bit more in the direction that we want to go. That styling has been brought over to some extent, and I've got a little bit of a font problem here. That's actually, I'm guessing that actually has to do with the file path that I've given for the fonts. If I look, the way I've got it set in my hard-coded page is in my CSS that deals with that font face, giving the path of those fonts. It's looking in a folder called fonts, and then for the font files themselves, if I look in my Finder, let's see here. Here's my fonts folder. Here's type.css. So it's looking in the same directory for a folder called fonts that it can't find right now. So I'm actually just going to move this fonts folder into the CSS folder next to type.css, and that should, fingers crossed, solve my problem with that font rendering the way that it should. Yep, got it. So that's good. So now, just like that, we've got our header from one page to the next. Cool beans. Like, again, we'll come back to that navigation here in a minute in our theme files. But for now, we'll leave it like it is. Again, if you had anything up here in the head, metadata, all that stuff, make sure you bring that over here too, but make sure you also don't copy over anything important up here that needs to stay. Next, we'll look at footer PHP. Now, on my hard-coded page, my footer is really simple. It just says, thanks for visiting. Check your requirement sheet on what all needs to be in that footer. I'm just doing this to show you how to move that container over. So same setup here, or same method that we just took. Instead, this time we're working in footer.php. So I'm going to go into my hard-coded page, scroll down to the bottom where I've got my footer section here. It's got a class of secondary and a paragraph with the class of body, which I've been using to apply that styling. So I'm going to get that. Now there is already some stuff in the footer in the template to begin with, or in the theme files. It's spitting out the date and the blog name. If you want to keep that there, then you can wrap it in tags and apply styling appropriately. I'm just going to replace their stuff with my stuff like I did with the header in order to carry over the styling, and if I want to come back and add some things to the footer like additional navigation or whatever else you have, we can do that in a bit. So I'm just take what I had for the footer in my hard-coded file, put it in footer PHP, hit refresh, and there we go. It's showing up at the bottom just like it was showing up on my hard-coded page. Next thing we'll deal with is this content area. Now my content area setup is a little interesting. I actually have a container wrapped all the way around inside the wrapper to create a little bit of dead space on the edges. So that's something that I'll move over and wrap around everything on the page, including the sidebar, but not the header and the footer, because the header and the footer you can see stretch all the way to the ends. And then I'll deal with this content container and the sidebar container. Now if we look at the code for index.php, when we were just a minute ago talking about this being our content loop, so everything that happens there is what we're going to want to show up in that content area. So pretty much what we want to do inside index.php is wrap that content loop in whatever container that we used in our hard code to create our content area. Not necessarily what we use to put each post in. That'll be a little bit different. We'll do that in a minute. But really what we use to wrap the whole content area will put on either side of that content loop. So if I look at my hard code, my content area is actually enclosed in this section with the ID of content. Right there, so you can see that's holding all of my posts. And well, actually a little higher than that, I've got a section with a class of primary enclosing everything there. And the only reason I've got that separate section with the class of primary, this content section is handling just the posts, but that section with the class of primary on my hard-coded page here is allowing me to get this title to show up where I want it to. And then the posts are generated below that. So the Apex blog title, that's what that's for. Remember, I also have a container that's creating this space around everything. And in my code, that's this div class space, and it goes all the way down to the bottom around the end of the sidebar. That's the first thing I'm going to actually move in. Whoops, I'll just close that div on my own. So I'm going to get div class space here. Now remember, looking at my page, this encompasses both the content area and the sidebar. So I'm going to close that div underneath the sidebar. Now, indentation, extremely important right now, so I don't lose myself in this code. Next, I'll wrap the content loop inside those section tags that I use to create my content area. So I'm going to get section class primary and section ID content, and I'll delete that H1 there. Oops, wrong thing. When I get inside this, so I'm going to put section class primary. We'll take that out for now. Section ID content, indented one level over. Take this line out. Indent all this stuff. And then I'll close both section tags. And one more. Okay. Let's go ahead and take a look and see if this is doing anything to our page right now. Hopefully something. Alright, well, we're one step ahead in that this has restrained the width of what we got here. We're having a little bit of a floating issue because of the way this stuff is set up right now, but we'll fix that in a minute. We'll also need to bring the sidebar over. But let's keep going forward. One thing right now I realized I forgot was to close the wrapper div in footer PHP. Remember, we opened that div in header here, div ID wrapper, and I forgot to close it in footer, so that was my mistake. Let's see if that resolves any of our issues of having that open wrapper. Not yet. We'll figure that one out soon. So back to index. So we're moving in the right direction. Let me look back at my hard code here. The next thing that I've got is actually inside ID content. I've got a format for each post individually. So how each post should be formatted. And you can see it's got article, class, post, an H2, an image potentially, and then paragraphs with the class of body. I'm going to want to transplant this format around the section of the loop that's actually spitting out the posts. So I'm going to come back to my content loop here. this is where the posts are generated. So PHP while have posts, article, h2, time, blah blah blah, all that stuff. This is going to dump my post out. So essentially what I want to do is that article is the same setup for my post. I also use an article element. If you used a div element, you'll want to change that tag in your loop code to be a div with whatever class or ID class that you use there. So I've got article with a class of post. Essentially all I need to do here is assign the same class to the article element that's being generated by the loop. So every time there's a new post, it creates another section of code that looks like this. So it actually puts it in a list with an article, then an article element of the class of post, an h2 title. There's the PHP that gives the title for the particular blog post, and then it dumps out the content. Now the content looks like it's dumped as plain text right now. In my case, I want the content to be a paragraph element with a class of body, so it'll be styled properly. So I'm actually going to have the content dump out into that paragraph element there. So let's save that and see what I got. This is kind of the iterative process where you save, you check, you save, you check, and see how things are going. Alright, so my formatting is picking up a little bit better. I'm still having a little trouble getting that body text to look like I want it to, and it looks like these elements are not exactly styling the same. We'll resolve some of these other styling issues a little bit later, but right now let's focus on getting that sidebar in there, and then we'll move on to getting some of this styling fixed. So the sidebar container, that's the last piece that we haven't dealt with yet. We know that it's generated here. Get template parts array sidebar. And the content for the sidebar is found in sidebar.php. The first thing I'll do, like we did for this stuff, actually, no, I'll just treat it all as one part. So in sidebar.php, like we did for footer or header, we're basically just going to take whatever container we used for the sidebar and stick it in this file. We will come back and add some interactivity and dynamic areas using widgets later, but for now let's go ahead and just get that container in there. So I've got, instead of, in the initial file I had div with the ID of sidebar, I've got a section with the ID of sidebar. So that's essentially just the same thing. It'll work for me. Except I use a different tag. This part right here, though, I've got a secondary footer or with the social media icons that actually belongs to the sidebar too. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy all of this stuff because that's what I want to be showing up in that section. And anytime there's a sidebar, I want it to generate this code. Oops. Take that spacing out. Got that. And again, we'll change this. This is static content right now where it's giving recent post types. We'll change that to be dynamic a little bit later. But let's go ahead and make sure our styling is carrying over. Let's see if we can get that to show up. Now we're not quite getting our social media icons. It's not able to find them in the correct location right now because of where the images folder is located. Again, some more troubleshooting stuff to take care of that we'll get to a little bit later. But I think we've reached a good stopping point for now, just showing you how to move your markup from one place to the next, and get this look to our page starting to match what we have here in our initial layout. Now, again, we've got some styling issues to resolve. We'll need to take care of that. That will be what we focus on in our next video, resolving some of the styling and making sure everything is behaving the way we want it to behave. That's going to be highly individual and specific based on your layout. But hopefully now you've got your major containers in the proper place, and now we will work on fixing our styling.